The day after my son's inheritance cleared, he handed me eviction papers. Imagine that, your own flesh and blood telling you to get out of the house you built together. My name is Robert Hayes. I am 63 years old, and I raised a son who went off to Harvard, got himself an MBA degree, and came back thinking he was better than the man who raised him. Ethan believed that $48 million made him untouchable. He carried himself like his diploma gave him the authority to label me, his own father, an embarrassment. In his eyes, I was nothing more than a blue-collar relic, someone who didn't fit the polished image he wanted to parade around his new social circle. He had plans for our home, too. Big plans. He wanted to gut it, remake it, turn it into something that screamed success in the language of Beverly Hills instead of the humble life his mother and I had built. But Ethan never understood one thing. He had only read, well, number one. There was another version of the story he hadn't seen. And here is something Harvard Business School will never teach you. Respect is not earned in classrooms lined with ivy. Wisdom does not come stamped with a diploma. And you should always check the facts before you burn a bridge, especially if that bridge was the very man who carried you across life's hardest waters. If you are listening to me right now, hit subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. Because this story is about how my son learned the hard way that money does not make the man. Let me show you how Ethan treated me in those last weeks before everything turned. When his mother passed, he moved back into the family house, claiming he needed space to think about his future. What he really wanted was time to scheme, to set up my humiliation piece by piece. It started small. At dinner, he would cut me off to correct my grammar. I could not care less. Dad, not I could care less, he would say, smirking like he had just taught me something life-changing. Then, almost every time, he would follow with, maybe if you had gone to college, you would know that. Next came the messages. I saw them one night when he left his phone charging in the kitchen. Still stuck living with my dad for a few more weeks. Guy's a walking embarrassment. Can't wait to upgrade the family situation. That was how he spoke about me. The man who had worked double shifts to keep food on the table, like I was just some problem to be upgraded away from. The real sting came when his Harvard friends visited. Ethan would gesture toward me with his drink in hand, saying, "This is my father, Robert. He used to work with his hands." The way he said it, like working with your hands was something to be ashamed of. As if calluses were proof of failure instead of the medals of a man who built real things that mattered. One evening, his buddy Colin, an investment banker, of course, asked me what I did for work. Before I could open my mouth, Ethan jumped in. Dad's retired now. He used to be a machinist. Blue-collar stuff. The way he said blue-collar, you would think he was describing a disease. But it went further. He started stripping the house of me. Every family photo gone. My union awards gone. Even the framed picture of me and his mother from my retirement party. All of it replaced by his Harvard diploma, custom framed for $400 and hung right where our wedding photo once belonged. When I asked him why, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Dad, I am building a professional image here. The people I am networking with have expectations." Expectations. Right. The worst moments were the phone calls. He thought I could not hear him, but our old walls are thin. I listened as he laid out his 5-year plan to his girlfriend. Step 1, collect the inheritance. Step 2, deal with the Robert situation. That is what I had been reduced to, the Robert situation. Not a father, not the man who raised him, but an obstacle to clear away. He even brought in a real estate agent. She walked through the rooms of the house where we had brought him home from the hospital, where we had celebrated birthdays, graduations, anniversaries. She said it was worth $485,000. Good bones, great location, needs updating, she said. Ethan followed her from room to room like he already owned the place. According to will number 1, I guess he did. Later that night, I found him in the garage. He was digging through my tools, 40 years of accumulated skill and memory. My Bridgeport milling machine, $12,000 back in 2001. My precision measuring instruments. Everything neatly labeled, hanging on pegboards and stored in drawers. "What is all this junk worth?" he asked, barely glancing up from his phone where he was scrolling through eBay. Junk. That was his word for the very equipment that had earned every dime I poured into his education. Tools that had solved problems textbooks never even mention. I just smiled and said, "More than you know, buddy." He expected anger. He expected me to yell, maybe even cry. What he got instead was calm. What he got was me quietly picking up the phone later that night, sitting in my workshop, making calls to people he had never met. People who understood exactly what that junk was worth. People who were about to remind my Harvard son that some lessons are not for sale. You need to understand, if I had stayed quiet, if I had let him rewrite our story without pushing back, I would have lost everything. Not just the house, but the life inside it. That home was more than lumber and drywall. It was where his mother and I built our life together, where we raised Ethan, where we held every celebration that mattered. And now he wanted to erase it all under the name of modernization. The real estate agent did not miss a detail. She praised the spot as prime, boasting about the walk score of 89 and its closeness to the university district where Ethan's friends all liked to gather. According to her, if the place got a facelift, brand new kitchen, open floor plan, slick modern finishes, it could easily bring in $650,000 or even more. Ethan was already drooling over the plans. He had chosen a company called Elite Home Transformations, the kind of outfit that specialized in ripping the soul out of older houses. Their glossy portfolio was filled with before and after shots of heritage homes that once had character but now looked like pages from some sterile design magazine. No history, no story, just glass, metal, and white paint. He even sat me down at his laptop to show me the vision. My workshop, the space where I had poured decades of work, was going to be turned into his sleek home office. The kitchen where his mother once cooked Sunday dinners for family and neighbors was set to be knocked down into an open-concept entertainment space. And the living room, where I once cheered him on after Little League games, would become something he proudly called a conversation pit. But the house was just one piece of what he was erasing. Ethan believed his inheritance crowned him as the success story of the family, the one who had finally made it out. And in that picture he painted, I was nothing more than the outdated father who had served his purpose and was now dead weight. I only learned how far he was pushing this story because Jack Turner, my old union representative and one of the truest friends I still had, came by to warn me. He had run into Ethan downtown at a coffee shop. My son was sitting there with some of his Harvard buddies, talking loud enough for anyone within 10 feet to hear. My dad's generation doesn't understand modern wealth management, Ethan bragged. The guy wasted 40 years in a factory and thinks that gives him wisdom. I'm trying to move the family into the 21st century, but he is stuck in this blue-collar mindset. Blue-collar mindset. He said it like it was a disease. Jack told me that one of Ethan's friends had asked about my background, and Ethan's response cut even deeper. Honestly, he said, I'm not sure what he actually accomplished. Worked with his hands, made an okay living, but nothing really significant. That's why I went to Harvard, to break the cycle. Nothing significant. That was the line that burned itself into me. It was then I realized this battle was not just about property values. Ethan was not only gutting me of my house, he was rewriting our family's entire story. In his version, I was the obstacle, the ceiling he had broken through, the embarrassment he had outgrown. And people were starting to believe it. His girlfriend, Chloe, had already taken on the role of co-author. She asked him one evening, with a laugh, So, how's your project going? And by project, she meant me. Not Robert Hayes, the man who raised her boyfriend, but a problem to be managed. Even my niece, Maya, my brother's daughter, started to change the way she looked at me. For years she had admired me, trusted me. I was the uncle who taught her how to change her car's oil, the one who helped her patch the walls in her first apartment when her landlord refused. But after a few dinners with Ethan and his polished new crowd, her words carried a different tone. Uncle Robert, she said on the phone, maybe Ethan has a point. You've worked so hard for so long. Maybe it is time to let the next generation take over. The next generation. Like I was some museum relic from another age instead of a man who had 34 years of experience in his hands. Knowledge that no search engine could ever give Ethan. But the part that really kept me awake at night was this. Ethan was on the edge of making the biggest mistake of his life, and he was too arrogant to see it. He thought $48 million put him above repercussions. He thought his Harvard MBA degree made him smarter than every man who came before him. What he didn't know was that I had been quietly building something for 3 decades. Something that made his inheritance look like pocket change. And he was about to lose it all, because he never learned the most important lesson of life. Always check your facts before you burn your bridges. In 72 hours, Ethan was throwing a party. A dinner, he called it, a networking event. In truth, it was nothing more than a parade, an excuse to flaunt his inheritance and showcase his upgraded family image. He invited 12 people, all Harvard graduates, investment bankers, consultants, the kind who wear their resumes like armor and count self-worth in net worth. Ethan dropped $2,000 on catering, hired some upscale group called Metropolitan Dining Solutions. Their servers showed up in black ties, speaking in soft, professional voices. The whole thing felt less like a celebration and more like a funeral for the family I used to know. I wasn't supposed to be there. Ethan told me point blank, "Dad, this is really a professional gathering. Maybe you could make yourself scarce for the evening." But it was still my house, at least until the paperwork went through. So I stayed. Ethan introduced me to his guests like I was part of the wallpaper. "This is my father, Robert. He is transitioning into retirement," he said, like I was a corporate asset being phased out of a company. The conversations were exactly what I expected. Dry talk about market volatility, mergers, portfolio strategies. Abstract chatter from people who had never picked up a tool in their life, but still thought themselves authorities on how the world ought to run. Then Ethan made his first real mistake. One guest, a consulting partner from some firm called Strategic Solutions Group, began discussing aerospace investments. "The defense sector is rocky," the man said, "but aerospace innovation, particularly component manufacturing, is where real opportunity lies." Ethan jumped in immediately. "Absolutely. The key is to target undervalued patents. Most of the breakthroughs come from smaller players who have no idea what their intellectual property is worth." I nearly spit out my coffee. The consultant nodded like Ethan had said something profound. "Exactly. We advise clients to scoop up patents in areas like bearing systems, turbine efficiency, propulsion improvements. The original inventors rarely understand their own value." Ethan grinned. "Total blue-collar mindset. These guys create something useful, file their paperwork, then just leave millions on the table. They do not know licensing, royalties, partnerships. They simply do not get it." Blue-collar mindset. There it was again. I set my coffee down and asked, calm as could be, "Ethan, could you remind me which aerospace companies your firm consults for?" He blinked. "Several major players, Dad." "Why?" "Just curious about your expertise," I said. Ethan puffed up. "I have been studying the sector in depth. Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon, the entire supply chain." "Boeing," I repeated, nodding. "Interesting company. Huge revenue stream." The consultant chimed in. "Though they rely heavily on smaller manufacturers, patent holders who likely do not even realize the worth of their work." "Exactly," Ethan said eagerly. "For example, bearing systems. Simple mechanical tweaks that could bring millions in licensing. But the inventors, factory workers, technicians, do not have the sophistication to cash in." "Factory workers? Technicians?" Ethan dismissed them like they were nothing, while the room listened and nodded along. He was in his element, strutting through business jargon, holding court like a professor in front of worshipful students. "The real opportunity," he declared, "is acquiring those undervalued patent portfolios and structuring deals properly. Most of those blue-collar inventors would sell for pennies on the dollar." Blue-collar inventors. That was the phrase that snapped something in me. I rose, walked casually to the counter where I had left my phone. Ethan was still talking, but I had tuned him out. My mind was on the locked cabinet in my workshop, on the folders, the paperwork, the patents Ethan had never once bothered to look at. "Dad," his voice had an edge. "Everything okay?" I turned back. 12 Harvard-educated guests stared at me politely, like I was a prop in Ethan's carefully staged performance. "Just thinking about what you said, son. About blue-collar inventors not understanding their own intellectual property." Ethan relaxed, smirking. "Exactly. Perfect example of why business education matters." "Absolutely," Chloe added brightly. "Ethan is always talking about how his generation thinks more strategically than his parents' generation." His parents' generation. That was the final twist of the knife. "Tell me something, Ethan," I said evenly. "In all your research, did you ever look into the inventor behind bearing system patent number 5846912? The air in the room stilled. Ethan's confident face faltered for the first time all evening. "That's pretty specific, Dad," he muttered. "How about patent 6896753? turbine efficiency enhancement device. I asked. Silence. The consultant was looking back and forth between Ethan and me, confused. Dad, I do not have those memorized, Ethan stammered. Of course not, I said, picking up my phone. But I do. I cleared my throat. Patent 584-6912. Filed in 1995. Inventor, Robert Hayes. That would be me, Ethan. You could have heard a pin drop. Ethan's mouth opened, then snapped shut. Chloe froze with her wine glass halfway up. The consultant looked at me like I had just sprouted wings. Patent 689-6753. I continued calmly. Filed in 1999. Inventor, Robert Hayes. Both patents generate about $1.2 million a year in licensing fees. From Boeing. The room exploded in murmurs. Chairs shifted. Eyebrows raised. Ethan stared at me like I had just punched a hole through his perfect image. That is not possible, he whispered. I smiled at him, the same way I had when he called my tools junk. Ethan, do you remember asking me what all that junk in my workshop was worth? His face drained of color. More than you know, buddy, I said. The dinner party did not end the way Ethan imagined. His guests slipped out early, leaving behind hurried goodbyes and hushed whispers. Through the living room window, I watched them gather on the sidewalk in little clusters, phones already out, no doubt searching patent numbers and trying to piece together what they had just heard. Ethan stood in the kitchen staring at the untouched catering trays like the answers might be hiding in a pile of cold hors d'oeuvres. Chloe sat nearby, scrolling her phone so furiously I thought the screen might shatter, her carefully curated social image crumbling with every new search result. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. Dad, we need to talk. Sure thing, buddy, I said easily. What's on your mind? The calmness in my voice rattled him more than if I'd yelled. His training prepared him for conflict, an argument, a fight, a crisis to manage. He wasn't ready for me to treat it like just another conversation. Those patent numbers, are they real? He asked. Very real, I said. And yes, they are mine. Robert Hayes is listed as sole inventor on both. Filed through Boeing's internal innovation program back in the late 90s. Chloe's head shot up. Ethan, she said, holding out her phone. I'm seeing multiple references here. Your dad's name is everywhere in the aerospace databases. Ethan collapsed into a chair, his shoulders heavy. But you never said anything. You never asked, I replied. And that was the truth. For all his talk about aerospace investments and undervalued patents, Ethan had never once thought to ask his so-called blue-collar father what he'd been doing for 34 years at Boeing. How much? His voice was a whisper. How much what? How much are they worth? I poured myself another cup of coffee. The kitchen seemed to shrink around him, his certainty about the world folding in on itself. Depends how you measure value, Ethan. Chloe interrupted again, eyes wide. Ethan, you need to see this. She turned her phone toward us. It was a Boeing press release from 2020. 12 employees recognized for transformational contributions to aerospace. And there I was, third from the left, looking uncomfortable in a plain blue shirt. The caption read, Robert Hayes, recognized for bearing system innovations that improved fuel efficiency across Boeing's commercial aircraft fleet. Ethan stared at the screen like it was written in another language. This is from 2020. Yep. You were still working then? Yep. But you told me you were just finishing out your time. I told you I was ready to retire. Didn't mean the work wasn't important. Chloe kept scrolling. Ethan, it says here your dad's innovations saved Boeing over $200 million in fuel costs across 20 years. Ethan's face shifted from disbelief to realization, then to panic. Dad, how long have you known about my inheritance plans? Since you started making calls about real estate agents, I said. And you just let me. Let you what? Assume? That's on you, buddy. The clock ticked loudly in the silence. I could almost see him recalculating everything, trying to rebuild his worldview from the ground up. Dad, he said finally, voice cracking. I think I may have made a mistake. May have? I asked. Chloe was still glued to her phone. Ethan, your dad's work has its own Wikipedia references. 20 different articles mention his patents. Ethan rubbed his forehead. Why didn't you tell me? When was I supposed to tell you? Between you calling my work junk and planning to turn my shop into your home office? He winced. I didn't know. No, Ethan. You didn't ask. Outside? Headlights swept across the window as cars pulled into the driveway one after another. "You expecting company?" I asked. Ethan checked his phone, dread written all over his face. "Oh no. What is it?" "Tomorrow is the Strategic Solutions Group quarterly meeting." I might have hinted that I had connections in aerospace patents. "Connections," I repeated, smiling. "This is about to get interesting." The meeting was scheduled at the downtown Marriott, top floor, glass walls overlooking the skyline, the kind of place designed to make men in suits feel like kings. Ethan insisted I come along. Not because he wanted me there, but because he was starting to realize he might actually need me there. The confidence he wore at his party had vanished, replaced by a nervous energy I hadn't seen since high school, back when he tried to bluff his way through tests he hadn't studied for. The meeting was set for 2 in the afternoon. By a quarter to, Ethan was already sweating through his $300 shirt. As we stepped into the marble hotel lobby, he leaned toward me and whispered, "Dad, maybe, just keep it simple. Don't bring up exact numbers unless someone asks." "Sure thing, buddy," I said, keeping my voice calm. But the truth was, his problem wasn't what I might say. It was the tall tales he'd already spun. The conference room was packed. 30 people, easy. Senior partners, high-level consultants, a handful of corporate clients. It was the kind of room where reputations got built or torn apart in minutes. Ethan was on the agenda to deliver a 15-minute talk about emerging opportunities in aerospace patent acquisition. His slides promised analysis of undervalued intellectual property, strategies for exploiting gaps in the component market, and, right there in bold print, working with blue-collar inventors. Blue-collar inventors. He had actually put that phrase in writing. At first, things looked polished. Ethan's presentation was slick, clean slides, plenty of charts, industry jargon flowing smooth. He looked confident, sharp, the kind of speaker who knew how to string buzzwords together so people would nod along. For a few minutes, I thought maybe he'd pull it off. Then came the questions. "Ethan," said Linda Foster, a senior partner whose reputation carried serious weight, "you mentioned negotiating directly with patent holders. Can you share any specific examples of successful deals?" Ethan clicked to a chart about value optimization. "Absolutely," he said. "In fact, I have unique family connections in this space that give me special insight into how inventors think." Family connections. My stomach tightened. "Could you elaborate?" asked a client from Raytheon. Ethan glanced nervously at me. "Well, my father spent more than 30 years in aerospace manufacturing. He's given me valuable perspective on how blue-collar innovators look at intellectual property." Blue-collar innovators. He just couldn't help himself. Linda leaned in. "And what type of manufacturing work was that?" Ethan sat up straighter. "Component development. Bearing systems, mostly at Boeing." Her eyebrows lifted. "That's interesting. Boeing's bearing technologies have been industry leaders for decades. Highly advanced work." "Exactly," Ethan said quickly. "Though, to be fair, many of the original inventors never fully grasped the commercial potential of their work." A man in a navy blue suit raised his hand. "When you say family connections, Ethan, are we talking about general industry insight? Or do you mean knowledge of specific patents?" This was the crossroads. Ethan could have backpedaled, admitted his father was just one worker among thousands, kept it vague and safe. But his ego got the better of him. "Specific patents," Ethan said, voice steady but overconfident. "My father's work has led to several innovations that generate significant licensing revenue today." The air shifted. Chairs creaked. Linda began jotting notes. The Raytheon client opened his laptop, typing fast. "Could you name some of those innovations?" Linda asked. Ethan looked back at me. Panic flickered in his eyes, but he pushed forward. "Bearing system optimization, turbine efficiency improvements, technologies that have saved Boeing millions." "Very impressive," said the Navy suit man. "May I ask, what's your father's name? I might know his work." And just like that, Ethan realized he'd painted himself into a corner. "Robert Hayes," he muttered. The man's eyebrows shot up. "Robert Hayes? From Boeing's Innovation Hall of Fame?" The room buzzed. Phones came out. People were typing, whispering. Linda stared at me with open interest. "Mr. Hayes," she called, "would you join us up here for a moment?" I walked up front slowly, taking my time. Ethan looked like the floor had dropped out from under him. On the screen behind him, his slides still read, "Working with blue-collar inventors." Linda turned to me. Mr. Hayes, it's an honor. We've followed your work for years. Patent number 584-6912 practically redefined bearing efficiency in the industry. Thank you, I said. And patent 689-6753, the turbine enhancement system. If I recall correctly, that technology alone has produced what? Over 30 million in licensing fees? Closer to 40, I said with a small smile. But who's keeping track? The room fell silent. Ethan stared at me like I had just walked off a spaceship. Linda looked from him to me. Ethan, when you spoke about blue-collar inventors who do not understand the value of their intellectual property, were you referring to your father? Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Linda finished the thought for him. Because Robert Hayes is not just another inventor. He is one of the most respected patent holders in aerospace today. His licensing agreements are still studied as models for fair inventor compensation. A woman sitting near the front raised her hand. She introduced herself as part of Lockheed's engineering division. Mr. Hayes, we've actually been trying to track you down for months. Your efficiency work could save us a fortune. Would you consider consulting? Before I could answer, another voice came from the back. Sir, if you ever file new patents, our firm would love to represent you. I lifted my hand, keeping things steady. I appreciate the interest. But truth is, I'm more or less retired these days. That was when Ethan finally found his voice. Dad, why didn't you tell me any of this? The entire room turned toward him. 30 executives, all sharp, seasoned people, were now staring at the Harvard MBA who apparently had no clue about his own father's accomplishments. Ethan, I said quietly, you never asked. You were too busy telling the world how blue-collar inventors don't understand what they've created. A ripple went through the room. Linda Foster's pen scratched furiously across her notepad. The client from Raytheon was openly staring at my son. Someone in the back even chuckled. And up on the projector screen, Ethan's slide about strategic approaches to working with blue-collar inventors was still frozen in place like a bad joke. Linda looked at me. Mr. Hayes, would you consider staying after? I think several of us would like to discuss potential opportunities. Of course, I said. Ethan slumped into his chair, looking like the air had been drained out of him. His presentation was finished. His credibility was gone. Everyone in that room now knew the so-called blue-collar inventor he'd been patronizing was worth more than all of them combined. But the afternoon wasn't over. As people started gathering around me, business cards in hand, eager to talk consulting, my phone buzzed. A text message lit up the screen. Robert, saw the news about Ethan's presentation. Boeing team is here at the Marriott for another conference. Mind if we swing by? Dr. Angela Ruiz. I glanced at Ethan, who was still staring hopelessly at the projector. Ethan, I said, I think there are some people you ought to meet. 20 minutes later, Angela arrived with 3 Boeing heavyweights. You could spot their importance the second they stepped into the lobby, the kind of confidence that comes from managing billion-dollar projects and knowing every room they enter bends a little in their direction. Ethan was still in the conference room, fumbling through some half-baked excuse with Linda Foster. From the look on her face, the conversation wasn't going well. She wore that expression people get when they realize they've been dealing with someone untrustworthy. Robert, Angela called as she approached. She smiled warmly. Good to see you. Word travels fast. You caused quite a stir in here. Angela was Boeing's chief engineer for commercial aircraft systems. I'd worked alongside her team for 15 years. Ethan had never cared to learn about those collaborations. With her came James Carter, Vice President of Innovation, Natalie Chavez, Boeing's Director of Patent Strategy, and Peter Lawson, who headed up supplier relations. Ethan's eyes grew wide as he saw this group heading toward me. Linda stopped mid-sentence, instantly recognizing the lineup. Industry people knew these names. Angela, I said, standing to greet her. You showed up at the perfect time. I was just explaining intellectual property values to my son. Ethan flushed scarlet. Angela extended her hand toward him. So this is Ethan. Robert talks about you often. Harvard MBA, right? Very impressive. Ethan shook her hand weakly. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. James Carter stepped in. Robert, we actually came because our legal team just finished reviewing your patent portfolio. It's being prepped for congressional testimony on innovation policy. Ethan's head snapped up. Congressional testimony? His voice cracked. Natalie Chavez nodded. House Subcommittee on Aviation. We're highlighting your father's patents as a case study in successful inventor-company partnerships. Linda Foster had now abandoned Ethan entirely and was listening directly to every word. Peter Lawson set a thick folder on the table and spread out a stack of reports. Robert, I know you're officially retired, but we wanted you to see this. It's the updated economic impact assessment on your work. The first page read, Hayes Patent Portfolio, 25-year impact report. Ethan leaned over my shoulder to peek, and I heard him suck in a sharp breath. Peter continued, flipping pages. Patent 584-6912 has saved Boeing $47 million in fuel costs alone. Patent 689-6753 has generated $41.2 million in licensing revenue. And your turbine modification patent, 886-2752, is projected to save the entire industry over $200 million in the next decade. Ethan stared at those numbers like they were written in another language. Angela leaned toward me with a thoughtful look. Robert, I have to ask, have you given any more thought to our conversations about succession planning? Before I could answer, Ethan jumped in. Succession planning? What succession planning? Natalie Chavez smiled gently, almost like she was talking to a student who hadn't done the reading. Robert has been mentoring the next wave of engineers for years now. He's been one of the cornerstones of Boeing's Innovation Fellows program. We've been hoping he'd consider taking on a formal advisory position. Advisory position? Ethan's voice cracked just a little, getting smaller with every new revelation. James Carter explained, it's the Boeing Innovation Council. Think of it as our strategic brain trust for new technologies. Robert would sit right at the table with our senior leadership, helping us shape patent strategy and guide new inventors. Linda Foster, who had been scribbling notes, finally couldn't hold back. Wait, are you telling me that Mr. Hayes is being invited onto Boeing's executive advisory board? Angela shook her head. Not invited. We've been asking him for 2 years. Robert keeps brushing us off because he says he wants to enjoy retirement. Peter Lawson chuckled. Although, in Robert's case, retirement looks a lot like consulting for Lockheed, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman. His expertise in patent acquisition is practically legendary. Ethan whipped his head toward me. You've been consulting for Boeing's competitors? I stayed calm. Aerospace is a tight-knit industry, son. Everyone knows everyone. My reputation travels ahead of me. Natalie added softly. And not just his reputation. When the Pentagon needed an independent review of next-generation aircraft efficiency, Robert was their first call. Ethan muttered the word Pentagon like it had just been spoken in a foreign language. Linda's pen could hardly keep up, and the other partners from Strategic Solutions had crept closer to our table, realizing they were watching something extraordinary. Angela glanced around at the growing crowd. Robert, maybe we should move this someplace private? I shook my head. No, I think this is exactly where the conversation needs to happen. I turned to Ethan. His face was as white as printer paper, his Harvard presentation about blue-collar inventors still glowing on the screen behind us like a bitter joke. Ethan, I said steadily, remember yesterday when you told Chloe that your father had never built anything meaningful? He didn't answer. His eyes were glued to the floor. Angela, I continued, would you explain to my son what the economic impact of my patents actually is? Angela pulled out her phone and opened a Boeing app. Combined impact across all Hayes patents through 2023, $247 million in cost savings, $156 million in licensing revenue, and an estimated $400 million in future value. The room went dead quiet. And Ethan, I pressed, remember telling your friends that blue-collar inventors don't have the business savvy to capitalize on their work? Ethan's head hung low. Natalie, I said, would you explain how my licensing deals are handled? Natalie opened her folder and laid out the facts. Robert personally negotiates all his agreements. 17 major aerospace companies. He sets the rates, defines the royalty schedules, and, this is key, he maintains approval rights over how his technology is applied. Linda blinked. Wait, you mean Boeing doesn't own his patents? Correct, James Carter said. Robert owns them outright. Boeing licenses from him, not the other way around. Ethan finally stammered. But, the inheritance. Peter Lawson looked puzzled. Inheritance? What inheritance? That was my moment. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. Ethan, I said, this is will number 2. The real one. His hands trembled as he opened it. Well, number 1 was just a test, I explained to the room. Your mother and I designed it to see what kind of man you'd be if you thought you had complete control. We wanted to know what you'd do with power in your hands. Ethan's eyes scanned the document, his expression shifting through disbelief, confusion, and something that looked an awful lot like fear. According to will number 2, I said firmly, Ethan's inheritance, the house, the financial assets, even access to my patent portfolio, depends on one thing: showing respect for the people who built the opportunities he's enjoying. He only keeps it if he proves he values the work that came before him. Linda leaned in. And if he doesn't? Then everything goes to the Robert Hayes Foundation for Blue-Collar Innovation, I said. A charity I set up to give inventors from working-class backgrounds the legal and financial tools they need to protect their ideas. Ethan was still staring at the will, his lips moving as he read the words. There's an evaluation period, I added. 6 months. During that time, he'll have to demonstrate that he's learned to respect knowledge earned through experience, not just classrooms. Angela asked, and who decides if he passes that test? A board of 3, I answered. Angela, you as Boeing's chief engineer. Jack Turner, representing organized labor. And Karen Mitchell, our family attorney. The weight of those names hung in the air. Ethan looked like he'd been hit by a freight train. Ethan's eyes lifted slowly from the will, his lips parting like he wanted to say something. Dad, he began. I cut him off. No, Ethan. The evaluation starts right here, right now. You don't get 6 months to warm up. You're already on the clock. And your first test is simple. Can you stand in front of this room, in front of all these professionals, and admit that your father's 34 years of hard work meant more than a line on your Harvard resume? The Boeing executives shifted in their seats. Some wore expressions of curiosity, others concern. Linda Foster's pen was racing so quickly across her notepad, I thought it might catch fire. Ethan stared at me, then at the will, then back at me again. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, his voice broke through, quiet but clear. Dad, I owe you an apology. It wasn't much, but it was a start. What followed wasn't easy. For the next hour, in a room packed with 30 corporate executives and 4 senior Boeing leaders, my son was compelled to confront every smug assumption he'd built his life on. That a diploma defined worth, that financial models outweighed lived experience, that calling someone blue-collar somehow stripped them of intelligence. It was painful to watch, but it was exactly what needed to happen. At one point, Ethan turned to me, his voice shaking. I need to know something, Dad. How long have you been planning all this? The will, I asked. Since your mother's diagnosis. 2 years ago. She was the one who insisted we test you. His face tightened at the mention of his mom. So she knew. She knew you were brilliant, Ethan. But she also knew you were blind to real-world respect. Harvard taught you to calculate profits. It never taught you to honor the hands that build those profits. Angela Ruiz, who'd been quiet until then, leaned forward. Ethan, may I ask you something? Yes, ma'am, he said, voice trembling. In your presentation, you spoke about strategic approaches to dealing with blue-collar inventors. What exactly did you mean by that? Every eye in the room fixed on him. He opened his mouth, closed it, then compelled himself to start again. I thought people like my dad didn't understand the business side of innovation. I assumed they needed people like me to turn their ideas into money. But now I see I was wrong. I can read spreadsheets, but I don't know how to create value from scratch. My father does. For the first time in weeks, I heard something real in his voice. Linda Foster set her pen down. Ethan, our firm has been chasing the aerospace patent consulting market for years and failing. You know why? Because we don't have trusted relationships with inventors. Your father, on the other hand, is respected by Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon, even the Pentagon. He's exactly the kind of partner we need. Ethan swallowed hard. So what are you saying? I'm saying, Linda continued, instead of trying to control your father's intellectual property, maybe you should try learning from him. Ethan turned to me then, and I saw something different in his eyes. Not arrogance, not embarrassment, just humility. Dad, would you teach me? That was the moment I'd been waiting for. Not his apology, not his admission that I'd been right, but his willingness to learn. Ethan, I said quietly, I've been trying to teach you your whole life. The question is, are you finally ready to listen? Dr. Ruiz stood, gathering her papers. We'll let you handle the family part of this, Robert. But Ethan, if you are serious about learning, we'll gladly give you a clearer picture of how this industry actually works. Thank you, ma'am, Ethan said. And for the first time, I believed he meant it. The Boeing team left soon after, and the strategic solutions meeting fizzled into smaller conversations. A few partners approached me with consulting offers. Others cornered Ethan, but the tone had shifted. They weren't trying to court him for his connections. They knew the value flowed the other way. Linda Foster was the last to leave. Robert, Strategic Solutions would like to partner with your foundation. We'll provide pro bono consulting to help working-class inventors protect and scale their ideas. That's generous, Linda, I said. Have your legal department coordinate with my attorney. When the room finally emptied, it was just me and Ethan sitting alone in that oversized conference room. His failed PowerPoint still flickered on the wall behind us, a sad slideshow about undervalued blue-collar inventors that already felt like it belonged in a museum. Ethan let out a long sigh. Dad, I've been a fool. Yes, I said plainly. I mean a complete, Harvard-educated fool. Harvard didn't make you a fool, son. It just gave you better words to dress up your ignorance. That got a weak laugh out of him, though he shook his head at himself. So what happens now? I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a folder, slid it across the table toward him. Now, you start learning for real. Inside that folder are your first 6 months of reading assignments. Patent law, engineering basics, manufacturing principles, labor history. If you want a seat at the table, this is where it starts. Ethan opened the folder I'd handed him, flipping through the thick stack of pages. Your evaluation board meets in December, I told him. Angela will test whether you actually understand how innovation works. Jack Turner will judge if you've learned to respect the men and women who get their hands muddy for a living. And Karen Mitchell will decide whether you're ready to handle the responsibility that comes with real wealth. Ethan looked up nervously. And if I fail, then you'll walk away with a valuable lesson in humility. And 40,000 working-class inventors will get the benefit of a very well-funded foundation in your name. Either way, something good comes of it. He nodded slowly, chewing on that truth. So, when do I start? Tomorrow morning, I said. 6 o'clock sharp. In my workshop. Your workshop, he repeated. That's where the real education takes place, son. Bring clothes you don't mind ruining. Time to find out if you're ready to get your hands muddy. By the following day, the story of Ethan's disastrous presentation had already spread through the industry like wildfire. Not in the way he wanted, either. To her credit, Linda Foster handled the fallout gracefully. Strategic Solutions sent around a discreet internal memo about ensuring accuracy in client briefings. Ethan wasn't fired, but he was quietly shuffled onto projects far away from aerospace patents. His Harvard MBA still carried weight, but not in the way he'd imagined when he strutted into that meeting. The first real outcomes showed up online. Ethan's LinkedIn profile, once filled with brash posts about disrupting traditional industries and leveraging family networks, went silent. His long bragging thread about strategic opportunities in aerospace patents disappeared overnight. Even his graduation photo, the proud, polished Harvard shot, was swapped for something muted, almost apologetic. Chloe, his girlfriend, took it harder than he did. She had built her own little brand on social media, posing at networking dinners, captioning photos with lines about being half of a power couple. But now, every picture screamed fraud. I don't understand, she said during what turned out to be their last talk. You told me your father was just a factory worker. He was, Ethan admitted quietly. But he was also one of the most successful inventors the aerospace industry has ever seen. And I never bothered to learn the difference. Chloe packed up and moved out the next week. At work, the fallout was slower but heavier. Strategic Solutions didn't fire Ethan. Harvard degrees don't lose all their shine overnight. But the rocket ride toward partnership was over. Instead of shaking hands with clients, he was buried in research. Due diligence, patent background checks, fact-gathering, the kind of unglamorous work that required actual understanding. It's for the best, Linda told him during his review. You've got the brain for analysis, Ethan. What you lack is humility. Now you'll learn to study things you don't already think you know. Meanwhile, the Boeing team became regular visitors at my house. Angela Ruiz would swing by every few weeks, officially to talk shop with me, but really to keep an eye on Ethan's progress. She'd hit him with tough questions about patent law, material sciences, or manufacturing processes. At first, his answers were painful to hear, stiff, clueless, overconfident. But 3 months in, something shifted. His responses became thoughtful, even accurate. He's learning, Angela told Karen Mitchell after one visit. Slowly, but it's real. Jack Turner, my old union rep, wasn't so quick to be impressed. After the first month of 6M sessions in my workshop, he pulled me aside. Robert, the kid's got soft hands and a softer head. You sure this isn't a waste of time? But even Jack came around. One morning, Ethan surprised us both by asking questions about labor history and manufacturing economics, how shop floor innovations had shaped whole industries. Questions that showed he was finally looking beyond his own career. Jack crossed his arms, studying him for a long time before finally grunting. Maybe there's hope after all. He's got a long way to go, but at least he's taking steps in the right direction. The biggest change I saw was in Ethan himself. The arrogance he once carried like armor was gone. In its place was something I hadn't seen in years, genuine curiosity. He began devouring trade journals, patent filings, and engineering reports. Not because anyone compelled him to, but because he was finally realizing how much he didn't know. One morning in the workshop, while we were elbow-deep in a bearing assembly, he asked me a question that took me off guard. Dad, how did you know which problems were worth solving? It was the first time he'd asked something that showed insight instead of ego. Experience, I told him. 34 years of watching machines fail and figuring out why. You can't read that out of a textbook, son. You've got to live it. Ethan's hands were tougher now, calloused from months of early mornings in the shop. His crisp dress shirts bore stains from oil and grease. His old social circle from Harvard had mostly drifted away, but in their place, he was beginning to build bonds with people who actually knew how to make things work. I think I finally get it, he told me after 3 months of evaluation. Get what? I asked. Why Mom set this test up? I thought success meant climbing higher than where I came from. But now I see it's about understanding what I was built on. For the first time, I believed he might actually pass. Not because of the inheritance, but because he was earning something more important, an education you can't buy with tuition or measure with grade point averages. The kind you earn with your own 2 hands. December arrived faster than we expected. The evaluation board convened on a Tuesday afternoon in a downtown law office. Angela Ruiz flew in from Seattle. Jack Turner took time off from the Union Hall. Karen Mitchell set the agenda. Ethan showed up 30 minutes early, not in a tailored suit, but in work clothes. His palms were scarred, his fingertips stained, the kind of marks that only come from putting in the work. The evaluation took 3 hours. Angela quizzed him on engineering principles and patent law. His answers showed not just knowledge, but real understanding. He could explain why patents mattered to inventors, not just corporations. Jack pressed him harder. Labor history, worker dignity, the intelligence required to fix problems under pressure. Ethan didn't flinch. He talked about the skill it takes to innovate on the factory floor and the respect owed to those who do it. Karen focused on character. Did he now grasp that wealth carries responsibility? Could he work alongside people who hadn't gone to Harvard? Did he see experience as equal to education? When the board voted, it was unanimous. Ethan had passed. That evening, we sat back in my workshop, the same place where this journey had begun. Dad, Ethan said quietly, there's something I need to tell you. What's that? I don't want the money. I looked up from the bearing assembly I was polishing. What do you mean? I want to earn my own first. I want to create something of value before I inherit what you've built. Will you keep mentoring me? It was the best answer he could have given, the one I hadn't even dared to hope for. Ethan, I said, I'd be honored. 6 months later, he filed his first patent application. It wasn't world-changing, just a modest improvement to a hydraulic system we'd been tinkering with together. But it was his. His idea, his sweat, his work. The foundation we set up now supports more than 200 working-class inventors across the country. Ethan runs the day-to-day operations, and I focus on mentoring. We're building something that will outlast both of us. Some lessons can't be taught in a classroom. They have to be learned the hard way. But once they sink in, they stick for life. If you've listened this far, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to teach someone that wisdom doesn't always come with a diploma? Drop a comment and share your story. And remember, real education isn't bought. It's earned, one choice, one calloused hand, one hard day's work at a time.